Today I want to share a story with you. It's a story about cooperation. Cooperation means working together as a team. The story I want to share with you is called Zinnia and Dot, written by Lisa Campbell Ernst. I want you to listen to these two characters as the story develops, thinking about cooperation, and pay special attention to the language that Zinnia and Dot use, looking to see when you notice that the language changes. Zinnia and Dot. The setting is on a farm. Two hens, Zinnia and Dot, lived in an old chicken coop. Both were very fat and even more vain. You would think that since they spent most of their time alone, they would have been friends, but they were not. In fact, they rarely spoke to one another. One morning, Zinnia broke the silence. "My new eggs are the most beautiful in the world," she said with a long, slow drawl. "They are as smooth as silk." Dot raised her chicken eyebrows. "Oh, no, my dear," she clucked. "My eggs are the most beautiful. They shimmer like pearls." Dot gloated. "But mine are like alabaster," said Zinnia. "Mine are as pure as the new fallen snow," crooned Dot. On and on the hens fussed, each insisting that she had the most brilliant, most perfect eggs of all. "Of course, my chicks will hatch to be as gorgeous as their mother," Dot said at last. She jumped to the coop floor and strutted in the sunlight. Zinnia was not to be outdone. She fluttered across the hay, displaying her brilliant feathers. "What beautiful chicks I will have," she said. The hens were so busy admiring themselves that they did not notice who sat at the chicken coop window. It was a weasel. Passing by, he had heard the bragging hens and stopped to see what might develop. All happened just as he had hoped, and the weasel now saw his chance. Crash! The weasel burst in the window. Wildly racing through the chicken coop, he overturned nest and scattered straw. It was poultry pandemonium. Then, just as suddenly as the weasel had appeared, he was gone. Zinnia and Dot picked themselves up. The air was perfectly still. All seemed to be as it was before, but returning to their nest, the two hens gasped. Their eggs were gone. "This is all your fault," each hen accused the other. "You were the one who started it all," Dot shouted. "I never would have left my nest if you hadn't been showing off," Zinnia shot back. Behind them, there was a gentle bump and the sound of something rolling. Zinnia and Dot turned around. There in the middle of the floor was one last egg. Two chicken voices shrieked at once. "That's my egg!" What a fight now began. Zinnia knew without a doubt that it was her egg, but Dot was just as certain that it was hers. Each refused to admit that the egg could possibly belong to the other. Finally, two mourning doves at the window interrupted. "Please," called one of the doves, "that poor egg is getting cold. If you don't come to an agreement soon, there will be no chick to argue over. Maybe you could share it." Dot and Zinnia eyed each other suspiciously. Share? Never. Still, the egg was getting cold. Fine, Zinnia said. I will sit on it first, and then you may. No, me first, then you. Sharing was not something that either Zinnia or Dot did well. When the egg hatches, the baby chick will look just like me, Dot declared. Then we will know whose egg it is. Yes, we will know, Zinnia snapped, but it will look like me because it's my egg. Finally, even those two grew weary of quarreling, each knowing that nothing would ever change the other's mind. An icy silence filled the air. Days passed. The mourning dove sometimes stopped by the chicken coop to see how the hatching was progressing. There Zinnia and Dot sat, unmoving, refusing to even acknowledge that the other was there. Why not entertain one another, suggested one dove. Sing some songs, tell some stories. Ha! Cried Zinnia. The only story I'll tell is about me and my baby chick leaving this coop. Oh, no, Dot hissed back. I will be the one leaving with my baby chick. Again, the hens sat in silence, brooding over what lay ahead. Now, all this time, the weasel had been thinking about just one thing, the egg he left behind. And the longer he thought about it, the more he could not rest until he had returned to claim it. While I'm there, I might as well eat those 2 old hens, he growled, setting out for the chicken coop. The 2 old hens, meanwhile, grew more irritable with each passing second. They only spoke to complain. Stop humming! Stop wiggling! Move over! Tempers were short. And that is when the fly buzzed through the broken window. Bzzz. Around and around and around he buzzed, again and again, until each hen thought she would scream. And when the fly buzzed past Dot's beak, Zinnia flung out her wing. Zinnia missed the fly. Zinnia hit Dot. That does it, Dot shouted. She jumped to the floor, dragging Zinnia with her. The weasel saw his chance. Crash through the window he came. At first, Dot and Zinnia froze. Then they turned on the weasel. Stop him, shouted Dot. Don't let him near the nest, screeched Zinnia. One jumped on the weasel's back, the other on his head. They seemed all beaks and claws. Squawk, cluck, yelp! The weasel leapt and rolled and snapped, but he could not rid himself of the battling chickens. He struggled back to the broken window, jumped out, and disappeared. The exhausted hens collapsed on the coop floor. We did it, Dot said. We scared the weasel away. Zinnia shook her head. Who would have thought that we could be so brave? The hens, giddy from their victory, cackled as they sat back down on their nest. One hen could not have done it, declared Dot. For once, Zinnia agreed. Lucky we both were here, she said. The thought made both hens cackle again, so hard they cried. Shh, listen, Dot whispered. A tiny tap, tap, tap could be heard underneath the hens. "Our egg!" they shouted. Dot and Zinnia huddled at the edge of the nest, watching. First, tiny cracks appeared on the egg. Time passed. The hours seemed like days. At last, pieces of shell fell off, one at a time, and finally the egg fell apart. A wet, bony, very naked-looking baby chick emerged. "He's beautiful," gasped Zinnia. "He's gorgeous," agreed Dot. Zinnia leaned closer. "His beak looks just like yours," she declared. "But his feet look like yours," insisted Dot. The baby chick cheeped back at the 4 eyes above him. "He's perfect," Dot and Zinnia sang. Never before had a baby chick been so loved, growing up with not one, but 2 mother hens. Now, that's not to say that Zinnia and Dot always got along. They didn't, but they did learn to be friends. And on the most important thing, their baby, they agreed 100%. He was the loveliest, most brilliant, most perfect chick in the world. And that was all that really mattered. Now, did Zinnia and Dot always cooperate? No, of course they didn't. In the beginning of the story, they fought with each other, they quarreled, they said mean things to each other, they bragged. But then there was a point in the story where things changed. Did you notice when that was? When the weasel came back the second time, the 2 hens began to work together. And what did they notice? They said one hen could never have fought off that weasel by themselves. When we cooperate and work together as a team, we do things and can accomplish more than we could ever accomplish by ourselves. And that's the truth about cooperation. Now, did you notice the change in the language? At the beginning of the story, both hens were saying, "My egg. The chick is going to be beautiful as I am." It was all about me and myself, right? But after the weasel came the second time and the hens began to cooperate, how did their language change? Then they began to talk about our nest, our egg, and he's as beautiful as you are. When we stop focusing on ourselves and learn to include others and cooperate, things get a lot better in our world. I hope you enjoyed the story of Zinnia and Dot.